Welcome back to the Caffeinated Christian Podcast. You're in week 5 of our special series, What is Truth? Last week we took a look at truth and self-identity, and this week we are taking a look at truth in mental health. But today we have a special guest speaker to help us examine the topic of truth in mental health. We have my brother, David Willert. David is a clinical mental health therapist who works with adults from a trauma-informed and personal-centered perspective. He specializes in working with first responders, individuals struggling with life adjustments, anxiety and phobias, crisis, trauma, depression, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. David also is a primary referral clinician of local law enforcement organizations. Prior to becoming a clinical therapist, David spent 12 years as a police officer in the suburb of Buffalo, New York. He spent 6 of those 12 years working as a crisis intervention officer as part of his agency's mental health intervention team. After deciding to pursue his calling in the field of mental health, he retired early from the police force and obtained a National Honors Master's of Science degree and is a graduate of Canisius College's CACREP accredited mental health program. David is practicing mental health care as a prospective licensed mental health counselor. David's professional training includes following areas: psychoeducation, psychoanalysis, behavioral therapy, trauma-focused therapy, crisis intervention, cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, solution-focused therapy, and humanistic therapy. So please, welcome to the podcast, David Willert. Hello, everyone. We're back for another episode of the podcast of the Truth series that we are in. You've heard a lot of podcast topics such as relativism, what is truth, family, identity, all these things. But we are back with another really important topic, and that is truth and mental health. But I don't know about you guys, but I have read papers, seen discussions, heard it in the past to recent history that's very popular, the idea of mental health and what's happening within our culture. And we have a great guest today. We have, he's laughing at me already. We have my brother.
It's because he doesn't believe you.
Yeah. David Willert. He is certified mental health counselor, and we have brought him in to have this talk on truth and mental health. So, Dave, how you doing today?
I am splendid. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the coffee.
Are you sure you want to thank us for that?
So strong. Even without the cream, it's so strong.
Yeah, it's strong. Like I said, it's a kick to my epiglottis back here.
It would be less strong with the cream. What you said just doesn't make any sense.
No, it would be the same strength. That doesn't diminish the strength. It just adds a different flavor.
It's true.
Putting creamer in is weakness.
Is it? Would you say I need to get some counseling for putting creamer in there, Bradley?
I think so.
Yes, perfect.
I know
We
a guy.
can analyze that a
We
little
can
later.
analyze that later.
I know a guy.
By the way, Ryan, Mom texted me. She wants to know if you wear the Gobble Gobble Thanksgiving jammies she bought you.
Not the new ones. From the ones last year, I still
still
wore.
wearing those?
Yeah, I
All
still
right.
wore the old ones.
She wanted me to ask.
Are they footy pajamas? That's
Are
the
they
real
footy?
question.
They do, and they have that back flap.
Oh, yes. Perfect.
So I have that too. Perfect. So, Dave, if you don't mind me calling you Dave.
Yes,
Perfect.
I'll allow it.
So let's jump right into this topic of truth and mental health. So let's start at the beginning. How would you, as a professional, define mental health? What is it?
So I'm going to get to that in 1 second and just set up a little bit.
Perfect.
So here's some things to know a little bit about me and my background. They gave a fantastic introduction, so thank you for that. And it is true, a lot of experience as a law enforcement police officer that has translated really well to this field of clinical mental health. I want to clarify that. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor. Okay. I am not a biblical counselor. I am not a pastor. I am not a philosopher. Although I love philosophy, and I think the worlds of psychology and philosophy and theology blend extremely well together.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
But for pastoral counseling and faith-based things, the guys across from me are better suited for those. I come from a clinical background. There is a rapper known as Lecrae. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yes.
Lecrae made this statement. He says, "I am not a Christian rapper. I am a Christian who raps.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a Christian counselor. I am a clinician who is a Christian and has that as my foundation." So just to clarify some of these pieces, because as we talk, sometimes the word biblical counselor, pastoral counselor, get blended and confuse people with what they're going to hear or deal with or work through.
So how does that separation, even though minute, it's an important separation of you are a counselor who is a Christian. How does that distinguishment between being a Christian counselor help in your field?
Sure, great question. First of all, we have this era right now where there's a lot of things going on within the church. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of where do I go? Is mental health even really a thing? If I have enough faith, can I just kind of work these problems away?
And we'll get to those topics.
And great, because I think it's wonderful, and I think this is a wonderful platform to discuss those things. But there are some differences in biblical counselors or pastoral counseling than there is in the clinical mental health field. For instance, in order to practice what we call psychotherapy, which is a broad category of technique, of influence, of looking at things, you have to have New York State licensure. New York State licensure is essential for that. And you can only obtain said licensure with not only a master's that includes an internship of clinical hours, but an additional 3,000 hours of clinical in-office sessions under the guidance of somebody who's certified to diagnose, to give testing assessments, and to monitor that progress. Oftentimes, not always, but often, a biblical counselor will have a master's degree in biblical theology or spiritual something, and that's kind of where it ends. So what they're allowed to do on a list of things is probably a lot less than what they're not allowed to do, and that's problematic sometimes because people hear the word counselor and assume they're going to be getting mental health intensive treatment when it may be, and it's great that it exists, biblical guidance or faith or spiritual assistance.
Yeah, and I appreciate you offering that bit of clarity, David, because oftentimes people will walk into my office as a pastor expecting mental health counseling. They think I'm certified in that. I'm really not. I can tell you what the Bible says on your issues. I can point you to Jesus. I can give you the biblical response to whatever situation you happen to find yourself. But I am not a clinical therapist. I'm not a licensed mental health counselor.
And it seems like that works on the opposite side of the coin, too. They would go to a clinical therapist looking for a biblical examination when in fact some of them who are Christians don't have the training, such as schooling and degrees and training under a pastor, to have that type of leadership as well. You can give your opinion being a Christian, but I think staying on your path is a good word of advice.
Yep. And one of the things that's actually hurt the church is and we don't have to get into this in depth today, but it's the kind of the misapplication of Scripture that the Bible is not ultimately a mental health text, right? It's the story of God with humanity and the redemption that we ultimately find in Jesus. But as soon as we start looking to the Bible for specific, intricate answers to people's mental health problems, like spirituality needs to be a part of people's healing.
Sure.
It's a critical part of mental health, but there are other aspects of health that we are fully aware of. It's the same reason you wouldn't treat the Bible as a physical health book. That's not what it's intended to do. You shouldn't treat it as a mental health book either.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point. I mean, there's and I'm using air quotes for the listening audience, there are non-Christian or secular psychologists or therapists that will wholeheartedly agree with you that spirituality needs to be a component of healing.
Yeah. So let's start, like I said, from the first question. We'll go back to it. When we were talking about mental health here, what is mental health? Like, how are we to look at this at the bare minimum?
So I'm going to do something a little bit fun with you, if that's okay. I'm going to play total therapist role and say,
a little Socratic method going on over here?
What do you think mental health is?
Who wants to go first? My definition is going to be circular, I feel like. It's the health of your mental state.
Yeah, I mean, I would fully agree with Ryan's definition of that. It's the overall state of your, how healthy is your mind?
Yeah.
Right? And I think just like other parts of your body can get sick, your your mind, your brain can get sick as well. So it's
Conscious and subconscious, I would
yes.
say, right?
So mental health encompasses a lot of things. It's the emotional, it's the psychological, the social well-being, and these things that influence cognition, perception, and behavior. Likewise, it determines how an individual handles stress, interpersonal relationships, and decision-making. And it's also spiritual. There's a component there as well. So one thing I'd like to add to that definition that everybody can pretty much find is that it can be preventative too. And that's something maybe we can touch on a little bit later, is this idea that part of the reason I got into the field is you don't have to be having some sort of psychotic episode to go talk to a mental health therapist. Right? There's things in life that happen: grief, job adjustment, confusion of career choices, dealing with the loss of a job. These are things that you can learn in therapy that prepare you, just as you would go to the gym to keep your body in shape and in health for whatever the reason. Same thing can be done with the mind. So I want to add that preventative piece. And it is such an important topic because if you go to NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Health, there's some startling facts. 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year. 1 in 20 U.S. adults experience serious mental illness each year. 1 in 6 U.S. youth aged 6 to 17-year-olds experience a mental health disorder each year. 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14 and 75% by the age 24. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 14.
Jeez.
wow.
Yeah, some of that lines up with my Gen Z doctorate study of their anxiety and depression just late in life, just being in Gen Z already, of everything that's going on, and suicide rate within Gen Z. It's quite eye-opening. So this podcast is about truth and mental health, as well as truth of mental health. So let's tackle this question here. How, in your opinion, have people given up the notion of truth with regard to mental health?
Another great question. So if we look at the definition of what is truth, right? It's kind of the circular argument you gave. It kind of gives a circular definition back. That which is true or in accordance to fact or reality.
Corresponds to we talked about that too, a correspondence theory of reality in the first podcast. Yeah.
And it's important to state that these are my personal beliefs and opinions. These are how I view my life as a Christian, as a clinician. This does not mean that each session gets played out to this extent, because at the end of the day, the client has autonomy. It has the client has the ability to work and focus on the things that they need to strengthen. So none of this is hurled upon a client, or this is what you need to do. You need this. It's to explore together. It's to create what we call a therapeutic relationship, to look at some of these things.
So case by case.
So and there are people that specifically come for Christian related topics. But the biggest component about truth is this notion that, well, this is my truth. And that is dangerous territory for a lot of reasons in the Christian faith, and outside the Christian faith for people that are dealing with some real hard-hitting stuff they're going through. So the piece that's important about the definition is truth with reality. Because if I have somebody that is telling me that they believe they are seeing small men and women take away their furniture in their home at night, creeping out of holes, that's their reality, right? Or that's their truth, right? To them, that's realistic. That's happening. They see that, they feel that. But the reality of the situation is that it's not happening. So I think there's two components to truth: what it is you think, feel, and are dealing with, and what is the reality of the situation. And I think those two need to be brought together in order to kind of understand what is truth. What is it?
Right. So so there's like this assumption, right? You have like this almost objective truth, and then someone else's truth, such as little people taking away the furniture, is sort of, I want to say, a misfunction of their mental state to understand reality correctly, which they still, to them, they are justified, but they aren't warranted in thinking that the little people are literally taking away their couches through cracks in the ground.
Correct.
So how then does the idea of truth from a Christian perspective like affect one's capability to know the objective reality, because that what you said assumes that we should have a standard of how we understand and see things that we are justified and warranted in. But when we come to this idea of it's my truth, it seems that the idea of having objective ground of reality just isn't there. So how do we understand our ability to comprehend this and obtain truth with relation to mental health?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something we can talk a little bit more of when we get to, I know you kind of wanted to touch on the idea of relativism and somehow how that works, and that actually lines up well. But this is a simple answer. This isn't a giant educated answer. It's using the Bible as a baseline. Okay. There is a very thin line, and some people out there are going to say heresy, but there's a thin line, a very thin line between schizophrenia and hearing from God.
Oh, yeah.
And it is crucial in those situations to have a baseline that you can line your thoughts, feelings up against. Otherwise, you may be finding yourself, and I'm not joking, but you may be finding yourself on top of buildings, preaching. You maybe find yourself in the middle of traffic with tracks that are putting you in danger. Things I've seen where they're getting messages from God and things that don't line up with Scripture. So it's important for somebody to have an objective baseline to hold that which they think they're hearing up against.
Yeah, well, you've heard stories in the news of mothers killing their little babies because they think God told them to do it. Because I don't want them to go through the pain in this world and send them to heaven, and God gave me a dream, and they murder their children while they sleep. But you're right, because what does the Bible say about murdering innocent people?
Right? And in the 15 or so odd years that I've been in full-time ministry, never have I stood up in front of the people that I was ministering to and started off with, "Thus saith the Lord." I've never done that. I use Scripture as a reference point for what God has clearly revealed to me for the sake of other people, but I've never claimed to speak for God, because we know what the Bible says about false prophets and pretty strong things. But kind of on that note, David, since you mentioned the Bible, and obviously as a pastor, the Bible is my reference point for what truth ultimately is. But at the same time, the church has misapplied biblical truth and maybe stretched it a bit too much. So, and as a result, the church has relegated mental health exclusively to a spiritual problem. So the response that a lot of people within the church will say is, well, your solution is you just need to go to church more. You just need to pray. You just need to read your Bible. You need to do all these things. Now, we're not saying that those things are not important to someone's overall mental health, but the same way that you're not prescribing penicillin now to people who have a cold, you're not reducing the prescription of what will give them, ultimately mental health just to these things. There are other things that we know are best practices. So what does the church need to understand about mental health, and what can better help people like me preach which is true about these things? Yeah,
you nailed it. And before each session with a client, I give a little spiel, a little bit about who I am, a little bit about how I approach therapy. Try not to just be this guy who knows book knowledge, but really get in there and express it. Some of these things I can't exactly relate to, but a lot of it, seeing or finding these excruciating situations, coming across somebody you've lost, dealing with anxiety, depression. There's a lot. I want to be in there. I want to work with the client. I don't want them to feel like they're alone. And part of the spiel is saying, yes, I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus. The place where I'm currently working has that name in the title. So there is some expectation that there's going to be that. However, that is client-led. That is not therapist, clinician-led. That is client-led. But I'll tell you, after I give this spiel, I've had numerous clients after I say, my job is not to just pray over you and send you out with some Bible verses. That is not, there are pastors and there are people that will do that for you. That is not my job. And they look at me and they say, thank you. And then they'll tell me some stories of horrific things that they've been told in counseling. Do you enjoy being spitting in the face of God every day as you make that choice? You need to pray harder. Your faith is weak. I mean, things that are crushing and not helpful, right? And this may be the last opportunity they get some exposure to not only somebody who's a Christian, but not just heaping on this, you need to do better with Jesus. You need to be better with God. It's you. So first of all, the thing I would say that mental health needs to be addressed by qualified individuals. This isn't a topic that is directly touched on by the Bible, right? Mental health counseling. It's not something you can specifically search and find. However, if you look in 1 Peter 5, or if you look in Philippians 4, it's called anxiety. Cast your anxiety on him. Don't be anxious for anything. We see hints of anxiety there. If you look at Elijah in 1 Kings 19, depression, prayed he may die, asked God to take his life, right? I mean, that's pretty obvious what he's dealing with.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for him, but it would lead to these depressive thoughts. I don't want to live anymore. We have 1 Corinthians that's talking about the body being a temple, where we have ideas where we can relate to self-harm or eating disorders or things that are not glorifying the body. So there are hints of it throughout the scripture where we can see that this is a topic that is something that needs to be addressed. I've talked to you about the clients that have said, thank you for just not handing me a pamphlet and being sent out the door. Right. But the thing is, having qualified people that are able to practice within the scope of their competencies, that are being monitored, right? Being monitored by others so that these sessions, I think is an important thing are being held accountable for. We cannot do therapy, especially spiritual therapy, in my opinion, in this day and age behind closed doors.
I agree.
Without a qualified person monitoring 100%. Even the session. Even me, I have a supervisor. So when I have a session, my session then gets reviewed and looked at, and we have clinical meetings weekly to discuss what is going on, what's happening, ways to try to treat these things that might work better. There needs to be accountability and a qualified boss with letters that are New York State appropriate to handle some of this stuff.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly.
And that allows for, because one of the things I think there's this gray line on, or this very like blurry line, is when someone who does like a lay counseling, right? Because I'll be honest with you, I took lay counseling courses and I dropped out halfway through because I thought to myself, what am I doing in this class? Because there's some things I biblically disagreed with and thought it would not be suitable to sit in a position that my brother is, though they assumed they could be after you got a certain certificate. How then does someone who does biblical counseling or a lay counselor, speaking to people because they want to help, like there's a lot of people that would love to be lay counselors, how then do you go, whoa, let's put the brakes here. I need to bring in someone who's certified to do this. Where is the line where this person doesn't accidentally tread and cause this more mental damage to someone else? Because I have stories of people counseling people and those people end up killing themselves. And these are like real stories, and they're from lay counselors.
I know. And
it's terrible.
I've worked with clients who have a lay counselor, and the lay counselor self-discloses too much about their own personal life. Then the person who's dealing with something doesn't want to burden even more their lay counselor, so they keep it quiet, and now they're in my office. So here's again what I think would be helpful is and again, there is a place and a time for these things. I'm not saying these are bad or they're inappropriate. Right. These are helpful things. These are communities that can help each other out with common experiences. However, I come back to the list of what should be discussed and handled is probably a lot smaller than what is. Okay. And I think churches, pastors, ministries should identify what those are. And if you have a lay counseling ministry, that needs New York State certified supervision, in my opinion. Because now you have somebody who's teaching a host of things or saying this is what you need to do. But if I know I talk about the license, but there's a lot that comes with the license. Liability, ethics, somebody to have to be responsible for. There's a lot of things that make sure are in place so that we're just not out there just saying whatever book we read or something that feels good and makes people feel happy, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if we want to get down into the nitty gritty, it needs to be supervised by somebody qualified. Yeah. It's all about the qualification. And again, I mean no disrespect to anybody that is is in pastoral counseling. I mean no disrespect for anybody that is doing that type of work, but there's no room for ego in that field. And I myself need to be aware of an area that I don't have the expertise in to be able to refer that client to somebody who better suits them. We're all in this to work together for the better of the mental health of the person. It's not about me. It's not about the church. It's not about the pastor. What can we do and what can we identify that will be best helpful for this individual?
Do you think there needs to be more working together of Christian counseling ministries with churches? Do you, in your opinion, do you see that they don't like each other or they don't know of each other? How do you see this working? I'm shooting from the hip on this one.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Good question. I don't want to speak for all the churches because I don't know. I don't know every system. I don't know all the relationships. I don't know referral process, but you're going to hear the word referral a lot. If you don't know, refer. If it's deep stuff, refer. If it's not something related to faith or some premarital stuff or a sin issue, and I'm talking a sin issue, not, I'm having anxiety. It's a sin. I mean, things that they're struggling with, refer.
Yeah.
There's no harm in referring. I find that some churches work extremely well with Christian therapists and clinicians. I find others like to keep it in-house, which again can be dangerous. If you're providing therapy and you're not exactly in your scope, it's a dangerous area because if you're going to be a clinician, that includes diagnostic capabilities. That includes the writing of a treatment plan, right? Progress has to be measurable in my field. And if you are just a biblical counselor, spiritual counselor, you don't have those New York State delegated abilities. So it needs to be very carefully done and working in conjunction with. Again, we're all here to work together as the body of Christ in this area. If I can send somebody your way, and I have, hey man, this is something best served by a pastor. I don't want to take your time and your money. This is something that, talk to your pastor about. Same way, hey, this is outside of what I do. Talk to this person, or here's a reference for a referral. It's just the ability to know, hey, we're all trying to work to better for the betterment of the people in the community.
Good. So, David, you touched on this a little bit here, and I want to revisit this a little bit more. You talked about sin a little bit just a second ago. So what is the relationship of mental health to sin? Are these two ideas, are they distinguished? Do they overlap and interlock with one another? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so great question about mental health and sin. Here's the thing. In my experience, a lot of people have come into the office and said they're having these thoughts and I'm sinful. I'm having these thoughts and I'm disappointing God and I stink, I'm garbage, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
If I tell you all in this room right now, don't think about a purple squirrel, what'd you just think of?
Oh, purple squirrel.
Purple squirrels all day, right?
I'm going to keep thinking about it.
Right.
Multiple purple squirrels.
Oh, now we've increased.
Oh, no.
So here's the thing most people don't understand. We are all compiled right here, right now, the four of us in this room, as a myriad of biopsychosocial experiences, interactions, learnings, how we were loved, how we learned to love, how we deal with things, sins, pleasure, whatever. We are an accumulation of how we've been accumulated. So it's not the thought. We have these things called automatic thoughts, and people get extremely distressed about these automatic thoughts. Things that in our past, boom, I have a thought, man, I stink. How come I keep having this? I got to not think about this. I got to not think about this. And what does it do? Like the purple squirrel, you're thinking about it. So it's learning ways to have the thought, understand that the thought itself isn't inherently a sin most of the time, and what you do in between that pause between thought, urge, and action, that there's a time to address those thoughts. And if I were to break it down, our brain wants to do two things simply. If I'm making it real simple, two things: process the information we're taking in and keep us safe. So if I have something come into my brain that I'm saying, don't want to think about it, can't think about it, don't want to think, oh my goodness, I'm failing. The brain is basically marking a stamp that is a threat, whatever that is. Because the brain wants to keep us safe, it will continue to have us think about that threat in order to come to a resolution. So that thought by itself is then trying to be pushed away. The brain's going, things that pushed away are threats. Let's examine this. Let's keep with it. Let's figure out what's going on. And then your brain will take you on a cyclone trying to outthink your thoughts. That's not possible. You cannot outthink your thoughts. So the thought itself, you didn't ask for it, popped in. Now, are there things that we can do to mitigate thinking? Sure. It depends on what we're viewing and how we're interacting with others and what we're listening to. All of those things impact thoughts. But as far as having a thought or dealing with a anxiety issue or dealing with depression, those themselves, in my opinion, are not inherently sin. It's what happens after the fact that becomes problematic.
Right.
So let me ask you to elaborate a little bit on that, if you can. Do you think then, because I'm going to ask you your opinion on mental health within the church and advice to them, do you think then that there needs to be a better causal understanding of mental health and sin then within the church? And what I mean by that is, it seems to me a lot of people think that your mental health is strictly because you're a sinner, right? And there, to some degree, you can see how a corruption of your nature has caused your brain to malfunction in a certain way. But that doesn't necessarily mean like your thoughts are sin, as you were saying, right? So then how do we work this importance? Is there an important level? Is it simultaneous? And what I mean by that is, do we need to focus on our faith first? Do we need to focus on our mental health first? Do we need to do vice versa? Or is it like a simultaneous thing that we need to go to at the same time? Because it seems to me that there could be a situation that you need to work on your faith first, or you need to work on your mental health first to affect the other one. Or you need to simultaneously do that. How, as a mental certified, do you determine which one it is? Because a lot of times when I speak to people in the church, it's necessarily you need to work on your faith first before it affects the mental health. How do you look at that?
I don't think there's a specific answer for that.
Okay.
I think that's case by case.
Okay.
I'll never, I think that's part of why I do what I do, right? Because there is an assessment period. There are tests that are given. There are diagnostic interviews that happen. There are things that give me information as to where this is going. And if somebody's dealing with severe depression or clinical level depression, by telling them, let's examine your faith, that may not register with them at that time because they need to get to a place of mental stability before we can even reach that. And to come back, if we look at Adam and Eve in the garden, right? Everything's going great. Things are perfect. And enters sin. The first thing that I noticed about that story is the enhanced self-awareness about eyes being opened, right?
Naked,
it's not that they're walking around with their eyes shut. Their eyes are opening because they are becoming self-aware. This led not only to their own awareness, but it led to the sense of separation from God, the disconnection from God, and almost an isolation in their psychological human condition. Secondly, it brought on, like you said, the fact that they realized that they were naked. So they're now introduced to this humiliation, self-view, feelings of inadequacy or embarrassment, knowing good and evil. And with that, not only knowing good and evil about how I'm vulnerable, but because I know how I'm vulnerable, then I can then see how others are vulnerable and either use that to my good or bad. So it's this human nature that we're brought into. So is mental health playing first and faith second? I don't think there's a specific answer. I think it's case by case depending on what the client is presenting.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's good. And building off of what you said earlier, David, going back to that story of Adam and Eve, realizing that Genesis 3, when you see that, it ushers in sin, it ushers in death, it ushers in all types of brokenness that pervades every single aspect of creation, including our mental health.
Yeah. Well, I also think there's an aspect of fear in there too, because they ran and hid. God was walking among the garden with them throughout the days, and they're like, "Oh no!"
And what did they do? They isolated.
They isolated. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, with mental health, I think our willful volitional sin could be impacting our overall mental state, but you could very well have somebody who's just been impacted by original sin. Like, this is the state of creation as it is right now. It's being renewed, it's being restored. Jesus is reversing this domino effect. But as we live on this side of eternity, and until Christ returns and renews and restores all creation, part of that struggle and part of leaning into our faith in Christ is going to be struggling with some mental health issues for people. And some will have it more than others. But I think it's important for us to know that the mental health struggles we have are a part of original sin. It's not necessarily my personal sin.
Right.
So if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, on the opposite, like you said, if you're engaging in activity that causes sin, whether that be an affair or something behavioral that's a problem, and now because of that activated event, now you're dealing with guilt and anxiety and shame, well, then that's a little bit different, right? Because it was a behavioral choice that then brought on the consequence of these emotional feelings. So again, it's a case-by-case thing where you evaluate everything that's going on. And honestly, I do like to look back and look at some factors that have created the person, but the optimal goal is to, how can we have this person move forward in a healthy, better mental state as they continue in their life?
Right.
Yeah. So what would you, if you had to give your most important advice about mental health, what would you say? I mean, this can be either for the church or those outside the church. What would your advice be when it comes to this?
Yeah, my advice is simple, or my words are simple. Mental health exists. Mental illness exists. And the same way that you would handle any other organ in your body to get it treatment, the brain is one that needs that too.
Right.
Whether it's in active dysfunction or it's preventative service or it's just talking with somebody because you're lonely and trying to figure out how to build social support groups. I'd also point out that if you're somebody who's diabetic and you need insulin, you're not going to just sit and say, Lord, heal me, heal me. No, you're going to go get insulin and you're going to administer that to yourself.
Yeah.
We have, it's hard for me to think, and you guys are more educated in it than me, but we don't just lay in the roads asking God to keep us alive. Right?
I do that every day. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, again, we'll have a session then after this. But we don't just sit around and wait for food to show up or wait for drink to show up or not work to get money. Everything requires some sort of act on our part. So taking initiative in your own mental health is no different than going to a job to get money, to get food. Right? The Lord wants us to work, and because we work, we get food. The Lord wants us to get better and grow in faith because X, Y, Z. There are variables that we can activate that get us healthy responses. Our job is not to just stand by. He didn't order us to that. But if we can identify the areas that help us and areas that are consistent, and again, for the people that are listening that are still on the fence of is mental health and Christianity, I would ask, what are the things that you're dealing with that you don't think line up? Because if you're practicing biblical foundation therapy, and again, we may not start there. That's not my job to tell everybody that this is what you need. You need Jesus to fix all your problems. That's not my job. But if you're really practicing that type of therapy, then I'm going to ask, what is it that's not lining up?
Yeah.
Because I could be missing something, but I've spent a lot of time trying to figure that part out because it's a weird line sometimes for people, and that's okay. But there's nothing specific that I found that is a complete contradiction to benefiting and practicing therapy for mental health.
Right. I agree with that.
Right. So I have a question, and this I'd like to toss it off to David and to Mike.
Sure.
So it's a little off script, if that's okay. But I wanted to ask, at what point can we draw the line between spiritual health and mental health? Because I've seen both extremes of biblical counseling and traditional mental health counseling come into place. And so for an example of this, one example that I could see both extremes playing in is possession, like demonic possession in the Bible. So a biblical counselor might say that there is no mental health issues, it's just demonic possession. And somebody that may follow more of a traditional style will say, well, there are no demonic possessions. It's just people not understanding mental health properly. So at what point do we draw that line? Because, I mean, I truly believe that all the examples in the Bible were that thing. So if it says like it was a demonic possession, it was a demonic possession. But today, it's easy to rule out demonic possession because we know so much about mental health. At what point do we not?
Right. Well, I'll say that I fully believe that demonic possession exists. It's remarkably rare. It doesn't happen nearly as often as certain branches within the church think that it does. Yeah, but I think it's important for us to not over-spiritualize things and under-spiritualize things. 'Cause everything that we do has a spiritual component to it, including our mental health. And I think part of the issue with the church is that we've really tried to bifurcate these two areas, or really, actually, rather conflated these two areas. We've said that mental health is only spiritual health, that it has to be something demonic at work. It has to be satanic if somebody has a mental health issue, which there's a remote possibility it could be, but you can't just jump to that conclusion. I think there's a lot more thoughtful questioning and getting to know the person, getting to know their circumstances that really needs to happen prior to jumping to that conclusion. Now, if somebody does, they need to have a demon exorcised. I've heard of things like that happening in my time in ministry. I've never seen it happen before. But yeah, I wouldn't send somebody who is possessed by a demon to a mental health counselor. I don't think they're properly equipped to handle that. Nope. But I don't know what your thoughts are, David.
Dave, how much do you charge for the hats?
Yeah, area I'm not even gonna touch. But yeah, so there have been clients that have been traumatized by actually being in an exorcism by their church. Yeah. There's been people that now hate the church because of that experience. And I guess the answer is I don't know. I'm not afraid to say that I don't know. Yeah. Being a police officer and now being a clinical therapist, I've seen some extremely abnormal behavior, whether that be people in the back of a cop car licking their own blood off the back of my cage, or squealing, or sealing things, down to people who are having delusion or hallucinations. There's a whole spectrum of behaviors that I've observed. I don't know is the answer. I don't know which one is demonic possession, and I don't know which one is just a mental health issue. I find that my approach with mental health is helping the person, and we're talking about some of the physical symptoms they're feeling or some of the emotional dysregulation, and that calms them down or gets them to a baseline, then it probably wasn't some sort of demon experience. I haven't come across somebody that hasn't been able to at least acknowledge that they have some sort of mental illness that plays into the behavior that they're exhibiting. So I would say that, again, if we're going to have a biblical baseline, let's look at those cases where demons were present. What were they saying? What were they doing? What was the context? And line it up with that. Because if I, like the Bible says, be really careful when you're trying to exorcise a demon. If you're not certain, then it's not a road you're going to go for, because it's not going to benefit the person.
Yeah. And to add to what you said, David, like I fully agree. Like I don't know fully. There's a realm of mystery here that we will never fully be able to comprehend. But what I would say is that I fully and completely believe that the spiritual realm happening behind the curtain of our reality most certainly exists.
Definitely.
And if somebody has a pre-existing mental health issue, can the enemy of God use that and exploit that? Absolutely.
Sure.
So pre-existing mental health issue.
Can I add some thought on that
before.
too? I agree with you guys that I don't think you necessarily can have this degree of certainty that you could the disciples or Christ have, because granted, Christ is the creator of the universe. So, and then he gave this authority to the disciples to be willing to know all the things when it comes to these type stuff. We have not been given that promise. I don't know about you, Mike, but I don't have that promise.
Nope.
But I do think what is really interesting in some of my research on this topic is background information of what the people are involved in. And when it comes to certain things, such as the occult, and opening them up to certain things that involve strange behaviors, I think we can at least have a degree of higher probability that something might be wrong towards the demonic end than, say, someone who goes to church and all of a sudden has erratic behavior because of some sort of depression, right? I think the background information is extremely helpful to helping determine what is the case when it comes to those types of things. Because I do know some people who have gone to some very bad behaviors of people doing things on ground and literally just calling out on Jesus, and the person instantaneously completely different and haven't been touched. You know what I mean? Since then. So
Right.
I don't think we can know, but I do think we can, depending on the background information, give a higher probability of what could be the case.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to distinguish between evil influence and possession.
Correct. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So I think those are two really distinct things too, where choices or surroundings or environments or even participating with substance intake that alter states of mind, it's really important. But no, you're not going to come to my office. I'm not going to lay hands on you with a cross and sprinkle water on your face.
Water,
It's not what I signed up for.
Every person
Scream, the power
leaves
of Christ
just
compels you.
soaking wet from Dave's office. Like, what's happening?
I'm never coming back to this guy again.
So let's go back to a topic that you talked about in the earlier podcast, one of my favorite topics, relativism. I want to ask you a question. How have you seen, because I mean, this could go deep into this conversation, how a relativistic worldview has harmed or helped mental health? And there's a few more questions I have from that. But let's just start with that one. How has this relativistic worldview harmed or helped mental health? And I know you love relativism and studied the topic. I think I gave you that book by Paul Bogenson on the topic. And I think it is one of the most damaging type of worldview filters that we can have when it comes today.
Agree.
Yeah.
Again, these are my opinions
Yep.
and my thoughts personally.
Yep.
The first problem is all truth is relative. If this is true, that truth is relative, then that assertion itself is also relative and cancels itself out.
Self-defeating, yeah.
I like to quote Socrates, so we're not all just thinking here, Jesus, Bible, these guys, these caffeinated Christians are just out for, So Socrates said, a system of mortality, which is based on relative emotional values, is a mere illusion. A thoroughly vulgar conception which has nothing sound in it and nothing true. Relativism, I believe, is going to be a downfall of a lot of future generations. I think that it weaves deceptively in phrases like, I have a right, regardless of how devious the behavior. Also in academia, we have a responsibility to challenge these opinions presented as facts on both a philosophical and psychological level. It's really interesting if you take time to actually look at the research for some specific views socially, where the grants came from, how the money was gained for this study. There are a lot of studies and thoughts and theory out there that come from non-Christian people that will argue some of these studies in their own studies. And who gets published, who doesn't. So I do believe there is some motive on what the agenda may possibly be at the time. But if you take some time to look at the research and where it was done, how it was conducted, and where the money came from, we may not be helping people the best with some of these findings. So as far as relativism, it's problematic because, again, if we're going to look at somebody who identifies as something, or let's take a different bylaw, right? People like to make fun of the identity movement, and I don't take that posture. It's sad. I feel for some people who struggle with that and the lives in which they've lived to possibly accumulate that and the trauma that's underneath that. They've done some meta-analysis studies. They actually published one from the Mayo Clinic that talked about this history of sexual abuse and the association that it has with the increased risk of psychiatric disorders and identity. So there are underlying things that kind of propel this false sense of identity or struggle with identity. But what I think relativism is scary is because combining both the cop and clinic world.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a 40-year-old man who feels on the inside that I'm 13 and I'm attracted to 13-year-old girls, who am I to tell you you're wrong?
Right.
Because that's my truth, right? That's how I feel. That's how I identify. I'm 13 years old on the inside. So if we're going to be able to do it with some social markers or some social identities, what's to say where the line is and who gets to say where that line is? The law? Okay. Well, the law is changing. The laws change constantly. At what point is there a definitive line saying, no, this is what it is?
Right.
There is no relativistic views towards this because we can't let that infinity loop of, well, I'm going to slide here and then we can slide here. There has to be some objective standard, in my personal opinion,
Right.
in order to keep some sort of structure, not only in society, but in mental health.
Yeah. Well, I don't think even someone postulating the law is very effective, in my opinion, because all I have to say, that's just some social cultural law that could be different in some other type of culture.
Right.
Just to make two notes on that real quick,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
that's all right. I think like as far as like the identity movement too, like people that have different or that struggle with identity, their mental state can't be great as it is because I mean transgender people at the very most, they have a 50% chance of suicide. And it increases with age. So like I mean like there's people that are like 16 years old that are getting transgender surgeries, and it starts at a base level of 50% of them will commit suicide within a year, and it increases with age, and that number might change depending on the day. But I mean, to add to that though too, imagine people that don't have any mental health issues that are growing up in a time where they're surrounded by people with mental health issues to that extreme of identity. I can't imagine that, you know, if you're going to school and you're growing up with all of your classmates that are having these identity issues, that your mental health is not going to be in a bad spot.
Yeah.
Almost like secondhand smoke.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like
Right.
a secondhand smoking kind of thing. Like, I mean, like, there's so many people that have identity dilemmas that are caused by some type of mental issue. But then there's so many people now that don't have a mental health issue that are just doing it because they're kind of fractured because of the culture that they grew up in.
Yeah, and I want to be sensitive too, because this population. I mean, we both theologians, philosophers, and mental health therapists. We all believe in the intrinsic value of human life.
Correct.
And I believe everybody should have a therapist, including therapists. We all have things that we need to work on, and it's okay to say that there's a mental health possible disorder there because it is in the DSM-5, right? We call it gender dysphoria. Now, whether that could change in the future, I don't know. Society seems to deem some of that. But guess what? If you can't get along in your day without a cup of coffee, you also have a disorder. That's diagnosable disorder, right? We're here on Caffeinated Christians sipping coffee, but if let's be fair to everybody, right?
Edit that out.
But that's the truth. That's the truth. So everybody has something that they're struggling or dealing with, whether that be food, whether that be attraction, whether that be identity. There's things that need to get figured out.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, consequences are different. Certain things play out in different ways. But I am less of a scalpel and hormone to the transition first. Absolutism. That's not my method. There are other clinicians who may be that way first. I am more of a let's get into what's going on. The biopsychosocial. What is contributed to what's going on here? Statistics show that there are some levels of trauma. There are levels of sexual abuse that show up in a lot of these cases, and a lot of times we see a culture in a society today that we have children and young adults that are being isolated by their families or growing up in broken homes. And all of a sudden they see all this acceptance around a particular group of people. And when they then share that I'm like this too, everybody's clapping, everybody's accepting them because they aren't getting it elsewhere. So there's a lot of factors rather than, boom, this is how I was born, this is how I identify, this is what I'm going to be. There's a lot of things. And if we're being fair to the client, let's sit down and exhaust and look at all the things that are going on before we just say, you're right, let's go to the operating table. That's not fair. And there hasn't been enough longitudinal studies done to look at the regression rates.
Yeah.
And these are life-changing things. And and people need to have the care and responsibility for individuals to say, rather than just go, boom, let's get this fixed and here's your doses of whatever. Yeah. Let's sit back and actually work with the person first for their benefit, not for a political gain, not for a acceptance. What can we do so you get the best outcomes?
Can I ask you too, real quick?
Sure.
Off the top of my head, I can name like several people that struggle with mental health issues that, rather than maybe going through therapy or anything like that, they go to their doctor and then they get prescribed a pill or some type of antidepressant medication. I want to know what your opinion is on that, because I've always said for the longest time that if you're struggling with something, you shouldn't be seeking a cure-all pill that, you know, makes that problem go away. You should maybe try and work through that issue. And so I've said this to some of them, but I want to know what your opinion is on like the order of, hey, I'm depressed. At what order should I go and maybe seek out this medication, or don't go seek out that medication?
Can I add to that question?
Go ahead.
I think it's, do we first seek physical resolve or chemical resolve? And what I mean by that is, say someone has depression, do we attempt to try to physiologically help them through that first, or do we try to put them on some sort of chemical first to help them?
Yeah, because
how do we know?
Yeah, just to go with that too. Like, yeah. I mean, one of these friends, he has switched through like 4 different medications, and he has never once not been on a medication since he started.
Yeah,
and you know, we'll just keep going and keep switching through different medications, and it doesn't ever seem like he's actually fixing his problem. Right. It just seems like he's switching medication.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So this is probably, if I had to guess, one of the biggest areas I've seen contention in with Christianity and psychology is medication. I gave the insulin example earlier, and I'd like to refresh that for people that are just checking in now. Insulin is useful because the body isn't producing what it needs to in order to function properly. So we get insulin and we'll use that. Or we don't have the same back that we did when we were 20 and now we're 40. So we'll take Motrin to ease some of that pain. So when somebody goes through a change, they're not the same 20-year-old back that they are now at 40. They're not the same mental accumulated experiences, adjustments that they now are at 40. Things change. What's important is I don't think anybody that's just a pastor or a lay counselor or a coach without the education should tell anybody anything. That's my opinion. I don't think anybody should be giving, unless they're a qualified physician or clinician, any type of advice about medication. Unless you have full background knowledge, let them talk to their doctor. And here's the beautiful thing. If you have a good therapist, they're oftentimes working in conjunction with that physician. So the physician may not be as knowledgeable about every single tiny thing the brain does or whatever, but they have the knowledge to know, yeah, this could work for that person. And they'll often call us and say, hey, this depends on HIPAA regulations, but if my client's given me the ability to say, hey, you can talk to my doctor, then I can give him an insight into what our 8 sessions have been about and how there doesn't seem to be the progress. That talk to the client, have a whole psychoeducation session on what these medications do, the families that they're in, potential ups, potential downs, and giving all that information to the client, again, because the client has the ultimate say in what they do and do not do. So something with antidepressants. Antidepressants are helpful for some, not helpful for others. They are helpful for people who have OCD. They are not helpful for, there's a mixed review. So oftentimes you will be in this, and I feel for clients because you're almost like this lab rat in an experiment. Which dosage and which number and which milligram is going to be the most beneficial? Well, statistically, the best treatment for something like major depressive disorder is an antidepressant with psychotherapy, meaning talking with a therapist, because then the therapist can monitor. It's not just here's your pills, you're on your way. It's the therapist monitoring, is there been measurable success now that they've been on medication? So I think it has to be both. I think the best, as statistics have shown, it needs to be medication with therapy. And it doesn't have to be forever, right? Somebody can go on a medication after the loss of somebody they loved because they're depressed, or have an extreme, scary, traumatic event and go on some anxiety medication for a period of time. But with the conjunction of a therapist, there's accountability that the person then doesn't take all these pills or is given a pill that they can hurt themselves with. There's some monitoring being done where it's not just I go to the doctor, he writes me a script, and I leave, right? That wouldn't be beneficial for the client.
Right.
So I don't think it's always the go-to first. I think it depends, again, on case by case what the person is presenting with. I think it's extremely important that anybody who's talking with somebody about medication knows all about the nervous system, the limbic system, the parts of the brain that are in play, what the side effects could be, what the benefits could be, and then a medical professional prescribes that.
Right.
So I think anybody who is not qualified in that arena and is giving advice on medication needs to be really careful, just so the person also automatically doesn't stop, and then they have maybe a serotonin withdrawal symptoms, or they go into depressive symptoms and things get worse. But oftentimes it's hard too, and that's why therapy is important. Somebody will feel like, oh, this medication it's not doing it. Well, there may have been an expectation of what the medication would have done that set them off on the wrong foot. I often deal with people who have psychotic disorders or deal with schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder that will stop their medications because they feel they don't need them anymore, right? Well, what happens when they stop? You see a huge increase in some of the negative symptoms and some of the positive symptoms, meaning more hallucinations and things like that. So I think it's a really specific area that the person dealing with that needs to be extremely qualified in before they can just put their stamp on it.
Yeah, that's good. So, David, what I wanted to do is I wanted to loop back around to the relationship between the gospel and mental health, if we could. And I wanted to share a quote from Gerald May, his book, Grace and Addiction. I don't know if you ever read that, but it's a phenomenal book. And in it, he says this. He says, to be alive is to be addicted, and to be addicted is to stand in need of grace. And with mental health, oftentimes that accompanies addiction, right? You even mentioned, like, okay, you have 4 guys here who are currently drinking coffee. Technically, we're addicted. I need my coffee first thing in the morning. So to what extent does the gospel, to this realization that we need the grace of Jesus, help us to understand who we are, and how does that contribute to our overall mental health well-being, and what is our relationship to these things that we, to some extent, depend on too? Like, could you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah. So the grace of Jesus is awesome because there's not an area that it can't be found, and grace comes in a lot of different ways. Just the grace He offers, the grace of people that He puts into your life that help you on a path. Right, that can be whether that's group therapy or whether that's people that you have as accountability people. I mean, grace can show up in a ton of different ways, and I think that's important because we sing about grace and God's grace, but do we really think deeply about it? What does that look like? How does that show up? I mean, it shows up everywhere. And I think things like, if we're talking specifically about addiction, and this may be an area that the church can help in, we are so, if I ever start another band, Ryan, this is what I'm going to name it.
The area that church can help in?
No. we no. It won't fit on the seat. Yeah. That's a long one to write out. But we are constantly in a state of chasing dopamine. Chasing dopamine. Yeah. That was the band name. But we really are. And here's the thing. Jesus isn't a pill. And we are such in an era where we can turn on our phone and get a hit of dopamine, whether that's good things we're watching or bad things we're watching. We can order food and have it instantaneously released and get that food inhaling dopamine release. We can go out somewhere, view it doesn't matter. We are constantly chasing dopamine. The brain wants us to feel good. It doesn't like when we're bored, especially since COVID, this isolation, this feeling of being separated from everybody. But here's the thing. Jesus isn't a pill. And when people spend time and they don't experience Jesus like they did their phone, they start to say, well, where's Jesus? I don't feel it like that. So the grace of Jesus is around. He isn't uphill, and it takes investment like any relationship to understand his workings within your life. There is grace for all sinners. There is grace for all these addictions. Yes, the consequences are different. The withdrawal symptoms would be different, right? If you have coffee every day in the morning and you didn't for the next few days, you might have a little bit of a headache or a little bit irritable. Whereas somebody who's coming off of something like heroin, those withdrawal symptoms would be different. So it's not that the principle is necessarily totally different. It's just that the earthly outcomes may be a little bit different.
Right.
But there's grace for all of it. Anything that ends in INE is usually a good indicator that we're dealing with the brain, right? Nicotine, dopamine, caffeine, these things play with our head. Mm-hmm. And the more we take and realize, okay, God, you give grace, you give it freely. You're in the midst of me working on this area in my life. Thank you for that grace. I'm going to invest in myself and work on it, because we will never be perfect. We're never going to hit that mark. But I think it's about recognition of where we need to improve and then applying ourselves to be able to better that.
Right.
Perfect. Good. So I'm going to close out one last question. Where do you see mental health heading in the near future? Is it good? Is it bad? And what would your final words of advice that you would give to people out there as we close out this podcast?
Well, if I'm going to take my own advice for my clients that I give, I'm going to say I'm going to stay in the present moment. I don't know. When I say stay in the present moment, I mean that there's no hope for a better past, and there's no worry that's going to control the outcome of the future. I don't know where it's headed. I don't know the events that'll happen to change it. One thing I do know is that if we can stay educated, and you guys do a great job tackling some serious things that are being talked about socially, biblically, if we can stay informed with information and learn and grow as the years continue, that's our best bet, to stay educated and not be complacent. I think that's where mental health goes. I think we have a duty as clinicians to have more information than less, for the betterment of a client. But I also think that as things change, as people change, as thoughts and ideas change, that we need to be as educated as possible in the field of mental health. I think that it's hopefully, my hope is, I guess, that it becomes more talked about. My hope is that it becomes less stigmatized within the church. And my hope is that more people understand that going to a therapist does not need to have some sort of psychotic disorder or hallucinations that you're dealing with. So that's my hope for the field.
Right.
What I do see is something technology-wise that I think is going to benefit is I think you're going to see a lot more brain scans to help identify specific areas of struggle within a specific client. So I think there's a lot of promising work being done there to more quickly address some of the issues happening in the mind so we can get the best treatment possible.
That's great. And before we sign off, can you give us one last reminder of where they can contact you or find you at?
Yeah, if there's any questions or clarifying information that needs to be answered, or anything that you'd like to reach out and talk to me about, you can send me an email. I'm pretty good at checking those, I think. You could send me an email at Willert, that's capital D, everything else lowercase, Willert, WILLERT, mental health @gmail.com. It's all one word, Willert mental health @gmail.com. And again, a lot of these statements and things were my opinions, are how I personally live my life. The client has the ability to work and share and grow as best as they want and as best as they need. My job is not to force down my beliefs down their throat. It doesn't do good for anybody. Mm-hmm. That's something, if we're dealing with spiritual things, that a pastor is more qualified to do, or a philosopher or a theologian like yourself is better able to do. My job is to treat mentally what's going on, and the client will help work with me to dictate that avenue.
Right. Well, that's our episode that we have for today. We want to give a special thanks to my brother David for giving us all that information on truth and mental health. So, every listener, stay tuned. Next week, same place, same time, to our 6th episode in the special series on What is Truth. And we are talking about truth in marriage. Hope you guys had a great time, and we'll see you next week.